Welcome to Facts Radio, your journey through history begins here. In this episode, we explore the history of New Year celebrations and how the calendar evolved, a saga that stretches from the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia to the marble halls of Rome. This is not merely a story of dates and numbers, but a chronicle of humanity's desperate struggle to tame the invisible beast of time itself. We will witness how emperors, astronomers, and priests fought to align the chaos of nature with the rigidity of human civilization. It is a tale of power, religion, and the stars, revealing that the calendar on your wall is a relic of ancient blood and ambition. Chapter 1: The Akitu Chronicles, Babylon's Cosmic Battle. Imagine standing on the dusty plains of Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve life into the arid clay. Here, in the shadow of towering ziggurats, the ancient Babylonians did not view the new year as a simple turning of a page, but as a terrifying cosmic reset. To them, the end of the year marked a moment when the walls between order and chaos grew dangerously thin. The gods were vulnerable, the harvest was uncertain, and the very sun seemed to hesitate in the sky. It was here, in the cradle of civilization, that the first known New Year's festival, known as Akitu, was born. The festival took place during the first new moon after the spring equinox, a time when the earth began to wake from its winter slumber. For 11 days, the city of Babylon transformed into a stage for a divine drama, blurring the lines between mythology and reality. Statues of the gods were paraded through the streets, carried on the shoulders of priests chanting ancient hymns to ward off evil spirits. The air was thick with the smoke of incense and the rhythmic beating of drums, creating a sensory overload designed to intimidate the forces of darkness. It is hard to believe, but this was a celebration fueled not by joy, but by a profound, existential anxiety. At the heart of Akitu was a ritual so strange and humiliating that it shocks the modern sensibility. On the 5th day of the festival, the high priest would strip the king of his royal regalia, taking away his scepter, crown, and sword. The king, the most powerful man in the known world, was then forced to kneel before the statue of the god Marduk. In a moment of shocking violence, the priest would slap the king across the face, hard enough to bring tears to his eyes. These tears were crucial. They were seen as a sign that Marduk was pleased and that the cycle of nature would continue for another year. This ritual enacted the mythic battle between Marduk, the champion of order, and Tiamat, the dragon of chaos and the primordial sea. The Babylonians believed that if the king did not suffer, or if the rituals were performed incorrectly, the universe would slide back into the watery abyss from which it came. Every citizen, from the lowliest slave to the wealthiest merchant, felt the weight of this cosmic wager. They watched the sky with bated breath, knowing that their survival depended on the precise movement of the stars and the favor of volatile gods. Whatever relief came at the end of Akitu was ecstatic, a release of tension that had built up over nearly 2 weeks of fasting and prayer. When the king's regalia was returned, it signaled that order had been restored and the mandate of heaven was secure. Feasts erupted throughout the city, with barley beer flowing freely and music echoing against the mud brick walls. This was the prototype for all New Year celebrations to follow, a period of liminal danger followed by an explosion of life-affirming joy. Yet, despite their intricate rituals, the Babylonian calendar was inherently flawed. It was strictly lunar, based on the cycles of the moon, which resulted in a year of only 354 days. This meant their calendar drifted out of sync with the solar year and the seasons, requiring the priests to arbitrarily add an extra month every few years to catch up. It was a clumsy system, but it was a noble attempt to impose structure on a world that felt unpredictable and wild. As we leave Babylon, we see that the desire to mark the new year was born from a fundamental human need to control our environment. They looked to the heavens not just for beauty, but for a clock that could tell them when to plant, when to harvest, and when to pray. The legacy of Akitu reminds us that time has never been a neutral concept, it has always been a battleground between human will and the indifferent laws of nature. Chapter 2: The Nile's Promise, the Star of Egypt. While Babylon looked to the moon, another great civilization looked to the sun and the rising waters. In ancient Egypt, the rhythm of life was dictated entirely by the Nile River, a serpent of water slithering through the endless sand. Their new year, called Wepet Renpet, or the opening of the year, was not fixed to a specific day in a modern sense but was tied to a physical event, the annual flood. This inundation brought the rich, black silt that made agriculture possible, turning death into life in a matter of weeks. The Egyptians, master astronomers that they were, noticed a celestial herald that preceded this life-giving flood. They watched for the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which they revered as the goddess Sopdet. When Sirius appeared on the horizon just before dawn, after being invisible for 70 days, they knew the waters were coming. It is a testament to their genius that they looked not just at the earth, but to the heavens for salvation, linking the two in a bond of sacred geometry. Unlike the anxious rituals of Babylon, the Egyptian New Year was a time of profound gratitude and communal intoxication. It was believed that during this time, the barrier between the living and the dead was permeable, allowing ancestors to join the festivities. People would visit tombs with offerings of food and alcohol, turning necropolises into banquet halls. Statues of the gods were taken out of their dark sanctuaries and carried up to the temple roofs to be recharged by the rays of the sun. The festival of Wepet Renpet was famously raucous, often referred to as the festival of drunkenness. This was not mere debauchery, it was a ritual reenactment of the myth of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war who almost destroyed humanity. According to legend, the sun god Ra tricked her by dyeing beer red to look like blood, she drank it, fell asleep, and humanity was saved. By drinking to excess, the Egyptians were honoring their salvation, participating in a divine play that kept the destructive forces of the universe at bay. Whatever chaos occurred during the festivities, the Egyptian calendar itself was a marvel of stability compared to its neighbors. They were the first to develop a solar calendar featuring 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 epagomenal days added at the end. These 5 extra days were considered unlucky, a time when the demon gods could walk the earth, yet they solved the mathematical problem of the solar year better than anyone else had. However, even this system was not perfect, as it lacked a leap year to account for the extra quarter day in the solar orbit. Over centuries, the wandering year caused the seasons to slowly drift through the calendar months, meaning summer festivals would eventually be celebrated in winter. The priests were aware of this drift, known as the Saarthic cycle, but tradition and religious dogma prevented them from changing the sacred count. Imagine the confusion of a farmer whose calendar tells him it is harvest time, while his eyes tell him the river has yet to rise. Despite this slow drift, the Egyptian system stood for millennia as a beacon of order in the ancient world. Their obsession with eternity, reflected in their stone pyramids, was mirrored in their attempt to create a calendar that would outlast time itself. They taught the world that the new year is not just a date, but a biological imperative, a synchronization of human society with the pulse of the earth. As we move toward Europe, we will see what happens when this reverence for nature is replaced by political ambition. Chapter 3: The Roman Mess, Chaos in the Forum. Far across the Mediterranean, on the banks of the Tiber River, a scrappy settlement called Rome was struggling to define itself. The early Roman calendar, traditionally attributed to the mythical founder Romulus, was a disaster of logic and functionality. It consisted of only 10 months, beginning in March and ending in December, leaving a gaping hole of about 60 days in the winter. To the early Romans, winter was a dead time, a period without agricultural value, so they simply didn't bother to count it. This 10-month year, totaling only 304 days, created a chaotic rhythm where the months rapidly desynchronized with the actual seasons. Imagine the absurdity of a winter festival falling in the heat of autumn, or soldiers preparing for a summer campaign while snow fell on the ground. It was a system born of a primitive, agrarian mindset that had no use for mathematical precision. The names of our months today, September, October, November, December, still bear the scars of this old system, meaning simply the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months. Recognizing this dysfunction, the second king of Rome, Numa Pompilius, attempted to fix the broken clockwork of the state. He added 2 new months to the beginning of the year, Ianuarius, named for Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and endings, and Februarius, a month of purification. This brought the year closer to a lunar cycle of 355 days, but it was heavily influenced by superstition. Romans believed even numbers were unlucky, so Numa ensured that every month had an odd number of days, resulting in a mathematical headache. To keep this shaky system aligned with the seasons, a designated priest, the Pontifex Maximus, was supposed to insert an extra intercalary month every few years. However, this responsibility quickly fell victim to the corruption and intrigue of Roman politics. Politicians and priests began to manipulate the calendar for their own gain, shortening the years to cut the terms of their rivals or lengthening them to keep their allies in power. The flow of time became a weapon, wielded by the powerful against the ignorant populace. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman calendar was in a state of total collapse, drifting months away from the solar reality. Harvest festivals were being celebrated before the crops were even planted, and the religious schedule had become a laughingstock. The citizens of Rome lived in a state of chronological vertigo, never quite sure what the date actually was. It was a symbol of the Republic's wider decay, a sign that the institutions of Rome could no longer manage the complexities of its expanding empire. Reflect for a moment on the frustration of the average Roman citizen during this era. You could wake up expecting a market day, only to find that a corrupt priest had declared a holiday to delay a court case. Time was not a constant river, but a jagged, unpredictable terrain that shifted under your feet. This era of confusion paved the way for a leader who would demand order not just in the streets, but in the stars. The stage was set for a radical intervention, one that would require the mind of a military genius and the knowledge of Egyptian science. The Roman calendar was about to be destroyed and rebuilt from the ground up. But to do so, one man would have to declare himself the master of time, an act of hubris that would echo through history. Chapter 4: The Julian Reform. Caesar commands time. Enter Julius Caesar, a man whose ambition knew no boundaries, geographical or temporal. Fresh from his conquest of Gaul and his victory in the civil wars, Caesar arrived in Egypt in 48 BCE pursuing his rival Pompey. There, amidst the intrigues of the Ptolemaic court and his romance with Cleopatra, he encountered something that impressed him as much as the pyramids, the Egyptian solar calendar. He realized immediately that the Roman system was a chaotic embarrassment unworthy of the world's greatest empire. Caesar did not merely want to fix the calendar, he wanted to standardize time across his vast dominions, creating a unified rhythm for the Roman world. He enlisted the help of Sosigenes, a brilliant astronomer from Alexandria, who explained the solar reality. The year was not 355 days, but approximately 365¼ days long. To align Rome with the sun, they would need to abandon the lunar model entirely and adopt a strictly solar framework. The transition, however, would be painful and disorienting for the Roman populace. Before the new calendar could begin, Caesar had to correct the decades of drift that had accumulated under the corrupt pontiffs. He declared the year 46 BCE to be the Ultimus Annus Confusionis, or the last year of confusion. He inserted 2 extra months between November and December, and another intercalary month in February, extending that single year to a staggering 445 days. Imagine living through that year, a year that seemed to stretch on forever, a psychological marathon for the citizens of Rome. It was a display of absolute power. Caesar was effectively telling the sun when to rise and the seasons when to change. His enemies whispered that the dictator was now trying to tyrannize the heavens themselves. Cicero, the famous orator, wryly joked that if the constellation Lyra rose tomorrow, it would be by official decree. But when the dust settled on January 1st, 45 BCE, the Julian calendar was born, and it is the direct ancestor of the system we use today. It established a year of 365 days with a leap day added every 4th year to account for the extra 6 hours of solar time. For the first time in Roman history, the calendar was stable, predictable, and divorced from the whims of corrupt politicians. Caesar moved the start of the year firmly to January 1st, honoring Janus, the god who looks back to the past and forward to the future. This shifted the cultural focus from the agricultural cycle of March to a civil and administrative beginning. It was a declaration that Rome was no longer just a collection of farmers, but a sophisticated state governed by law and science. The reform was a triumph of rationality over superstition, but it was also a stamp of Caesar's ego upon eternity. The month of Quintilis was renamed July in his honor, ensuring his name would be spoken every summer for as long as civilization endured. Yet, even the brilliant Sosigenes had made a tiny miscalculation in the length of the solar year, a microscopic error that would tick away silently for centuries. As we close this chapter, we see the new year transformed from a terrifying religious ritual into a secular, astronomical event. Caesar had tamed time, but he had also sown the seeds for a new kind of problem that would not be discovered for another 1,500 years. The story of the calendar was far from over, it was merely waiting for the next empire to rise. Chapter 5, The Medieval Fracture, A World Out of Sync. As the iron grip of Rome loosened and the empire crumbled into dust, the unified heartbeat of the calendar began to falter. In the dark forests and cold stone monasteries of medieval Europe, the clarity of the Julian system gave way to a fractured, religious mosaic. The Church, rising from the ashes of imperial authority, looked upon January 1st with deep suspicion, viewing its raucous celebrations as a pagan hangover unfit for a Christian world. They sought to scrub the calendar clean of Roman gods and wine-soaked festivals, attempting to realign time not with Caesar, but with Christ. For centuries, the very concept of New Year's Day became a moving target, shifting widely depending on which kingdom, or even which village, you stood in. Some regions celebrated the New Year on December 25th, tying the beginning of time to the birth of Jesus. Others, seeking a more theological entry point, moved the date to March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, marking the moment the divine entered the world. Imagine the confusion of a traveler in the Middle Ages, walking from a town where it was still the old year into a neighboring valley where the new year had already begun. This era, known as the style of the Annunciation or of Lady Day, dominated England and much of Europe for centuries. It created a world where the legal and spiritual year did not begin in the dead of winter, but amidst the thawing mud and budding trees of spring. Yet, the ghost of January 1st never truly vanished, it lingered in the folklore of the peasantry and the administrative habits of the stubborn. The common people, bound to the rhythms of the earth rather than the edicts of the pulpit, continued to light bonfires and exchange gifts in the depth of winter, keeping the old heartbeat alive. It is hard to believe, but during this period, history itself became a knotted tapestry of conflicting dates. A king might sign a treaty in what he considered 1190, while his rival across the channel recorded it as 1189. Scribes and chroniclers worked in dimly lit scriptoriums, desperately trying to reconcile these temporal discrepancies, stitching together a timeline that was constantly fraying at the edges. It was a time when authority over the calendar was a proxy for authority over the soul. Despite the Church's efforts, the Julian calendar remained the underlying machinery of society, ticking away in the background. But the machinery was flawed, and the error that Sosigenes and Caesar had overlooked was beginning to fester. The Julian year was 11 minutes and 14 seconds longer than the actual solar year, a trivial amount in a single lifetime, perhaps, but a catastrophic drift over the span of a millennium. Slowly, imperceptibly, the calendar was sliding away from the sun, dragging the seasons out of alignment. The spring equinox, the anchor for calculating Easter, was drifting backward toward February, threatening to decouple the holiest day of Christianity from its scriptural roots. The monks, who were the keepers of time and the watchers of the sky, began to notice that the shadows in their cathedrals were falling in the wrong places. A crisis was brewing, not of faith, but of mathematics, a silent crisis that would eventually force the hand of the most powerful man in Christendom. Chapter 6, The Silent Thief, The Drift of Centuries. By the 16th century, the accumulated error of the Julian calendar had grown into a gaping wound of 10 full days. The silent thief of time had stolen the synchronization between the liturgical year and the celestial reality. This was not merely an academic annoyance, for the Catholic Church, it was a spiritual emergency. If Easter continued to drift, it would eventually be celebrated in the snows of winter, severing the symbolic link between the resurrection and the rebirth of spring. Astronomers and mathematicians sounded the alarm, warning that the calendar was fundamentally broken. The Council of Trent, a gathering of the Church's highest powers, mandated a solution, but the problem required a mind capable of dissecting the movement of the spheres. Enter Aloysius Lilius, an obscure doctor from Calabria, and Christopher Clavius, a Jesuit astronomer of immense intellect. They stared into the abyss of the Julian math and realized that a patch would not suffice, the system needed surgery. The solution they proposed was radical and terrifying in its simplicity. To stop the drift, they devised a new formula for leap years. Years divisible by 100 would be leap years only if they were also divisible by 400. This brilliant adjustment reduced the average year length to 365.2425 days, a precision that mirrored the solar cycle almost perfectly. But fixing the future was the easy part, the real challenge lay in fixing the past. To realign the calendar with the sun, the 10 days that had been gained over the centuries had to be erased from existence. It was a proposition that defied human intuition, to simply cut time out of the timeline. Imagine the tension in the halls of the Vatican as they debated this unprecedented act of deletion. They were preparing to tell the world that 10 days of life, of commerce, of history, would simply not happen. The magnitude of this shift cannot be overstated. It was an attempt to edit the fabric of reality by decree. The Church was asserting that its authority superseded the intuitive flow of days and nights. They were asking the faithful to trust that the time on the calendar was more real than the continuous count they had kept since birth. It was a clash between the abstract truth of science and the tangible comfort of tradition. As the plan solidified, the weight of the decision fell upon the shoulders of Pope Gregory XIII. He was not an astronomer, but a pragmatic leader who understood that a unified church required a unified time. With a stroke of his pen, he prepared to issue the papal bull Inter Gravissimus, a document that would reset the clock of civilization. The stage was set for the most jarring temporal jump in human history. Chapter 7, The Pope's Decree, The Night Time Vanished. On a crisp autumn evening in October 1582, the citizens of Rome, Spain, and Portugal went to sleep on Thursday, October 4th. When they awoke the next morning, the calendar on the wall declared it was Friday, October 15th. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had vanished into the ether, swallowed by the Gregorian reform. It was a moment of profound psychological dislocation, a collective gasp as millions of people skipped over birthdays, anniversaries, and deadlines. The transition was technically seamless, the days of the week continued uninterrupted, but the societal shock was immense. Landlords demanded a full month's rent for a truncated month, bankers scrambled to calculate interest on loans for days that never existed. Servants and laborers feared they were being cheated out of wages, sparking grumbles in the marketplaces and piazzas. It is hard to fathom the unease of waking up and feeling that a piece of your life has been surgically removed by a distant authority. This new system, the Gregorian Calendar, also officially restored January 1st as the start of the new year, cementing the date that Caesar had chosen 16 centuries earlier. The Church had finally made peace with the Roman tradition, recognizing that a standardized civil year was essential for the functioning of a modern world. The wild variations of Lady Day and Christmas start dates began to recede in Catholic lands, replaced by a unified, solar-accurate heartbeat. However, the implementation was anything but universal. While the Catholic strongholds of Europe fell in line immediately, the rest of the world looked on with deep suspicion. The reform had come from the Pope, and in the charged atmosphere of the post-Reformation era, anything from Rome was viewed as a trick of the Antichrist. The Protestant nation saw the lost 10 days not as a scientific correction, but as a papist plot to steal time from their lives. This refusal created a bizarre, bifurcated reality across the continent of Europe. A traveler crossing the border from Catholic France to Protestant Germany would effectively step back 10 days in time. Letters sent from London to Paris often arrived on a date earlier than they were posted. Diplomatic treaties had to be double-dated, carrying both old-style and new-style dates to avoid legal catastrophes. For nearly 200 years, Europe operated on two different clocks, a testament to how deeply religion and politics could blind nations to scientific truth. The Protestant time and Catholic time divide became a symbol of the fractured state of Christendom. It was a stubborn standoff, where the pride of kings and the dogma of theologians outweighed the undeniable evidence of the sun. Chapter 8, The Great Resistance, A World Divided. The resistance to the Gregorian calendar produced some of the most absurd and chaotic moments in the history of timekeeping. In Germany, the Protestant states clung to the Julian calendar with a ferocity that baffled astronomers. Even the famous astronomer Johannes Kepler, a Protestant himself, pleaded with his leaders to accept the Catholic math, famously remarking that they would rather disagree with the solar system than agree with the Pope. In Russia, the resistance was even more deeply entrenched, bound by the mystic traditions of the Orthodox Church. They viewed the Gregorian reform as a heresy, a corruption of the sacred time handed down by the Church Fathers. Russia would remain on the Julian calendar for centuries longer, a decision that would eventually lead to the strange historical footnote of the October Revolution actually taking place in November. The Tsars ruled over an empire that was literally lagging behind the rest of the Western world. Meanwhile, in the expanding British Empire, the confusion was becoming an administrative nightmare. As Britain grew into a global superpower, its adherence to the old-style calendar put it out of sync with its trading partners and allies. British merchants lost money due to confusion over delivery dates, naval captains struggled to coordinate maneuvers with continental fleets. The stubbornness of the Anglican Church was beginning to cost the crown cold, hard coin. It wasn't until the Enlightenment brought a wave of rationalism that the walls of resistance began to crack. The sheer practicality of a unified calendar became impossible to ignore. One by one, the Protestant nations began to capitulate, quietly adopting the Gregorian system and swallowing their pride. But the transition was rarely smooth. In some places, it sparked genuine civil unrest. The most famous of these delayed transitions occurred in Great Britain and its American colonies. By the time Parliament finally accepted the inevitable, the drift between the calendars had widened to 11 days. The decision was made to align with the rest of Europe in 1752. It was a capitulation to reality, but for the common people, it felt like a betrayal by their own government. Imagine the scene in the smoky taverns of London or the meeting houses of Boston as the news spread. The government was planning to cut 11 days out of September. To the uneducated, this wasn't just a number change, it felt like their lives were being shortened. The abstract concept of calendar drift meant nothing compared to the visceral feeling that the king was stealing their time. Chapter 9, The British Riot, Give Us Our 11 Days. In September 1752, the British Empire finally took the plunge. Wednesday, September 2nd, was followed immediately by Thursday, September 14th. In an instant, the Atlantic world jumped forward to join the European timeline. While history books often exaggerate the violence, there is no doubt that calendar riots and protests erupted in pockets across the country. The slogan, "Give us our 11 days," became a rallying cry for those who felt the government had overstepped its bounds. Tenants were furious that they had to pay a full month's rent for a September that was less than 3 weeks long. Banks refused to pay interest for the missing days, leading to a furious outcry from the merchant class. In the rural countryside, superstition ran wild. People believed that cattle would not kneel on Christmas Eve if the date was wrong, and that crops planted on the new dates would wither and die. It was a collision between the Enlightenment elite and the traditional worldview of the populace. Across the ocean, in the American colonies, a young Benjamin Franklin used his Poor Richard's Almanac to calm the public. With his characteristic wit, he welcomed the change, joking that it was pleasant for an old man to go to bed on the 2nd and wake up on the 14th. His pragmatic acceptance helped smooth the transition in America, framing it as a step toward modernity and progress rather than a loss of time. The shift also officially moved the British New Year from Lady Day in March to January 1st. For the first time, the English-speaking world celebrated the New Year in the dead of winter alongside their French and Spanish rivals. This unification paved the way for a truly global consciousness. The barriers of time that had separated nations were dissolving, replaced by a standardized grid that covered the entire planet. By the 19th century, as steamships and telegraphs shrank the world, the Gregorian calendar became the lingua franca of commerce and diplomacy. Japan adopted it in 1873 during the Meiji Restoration, signaling its entry into the modern world. Turkey followed suit in 1926 after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The calendar had become a tool of modernization, a signal that a nation was ready to march in step with the industrial drumbeat of the West. Yet, as the dates aligned, the celebration itself began to evolve. New Year's Eve shifted from a religious observance or a superstitious ritual into a secular, communal countdown. The invention of the mechanical clock and the pocket watch had given humanity a new obsession: precision. We no longer just watched the sun, we watched the second hand. Chapter 10, The Global Countdown, A World United in Time. As the 20th century dawned, the New Year's celebration transformed into the electric spectacle we recognize today. The focal point of this transformation was a triangular intersection in New York City, Times Square. In 1904, The New York Times opened its new headquarters there and threw a massive party to celebrate, using dynamite to set off fireworks. But it was 3 years later, in 1907, that a new tradition was born, inspired by the maritime time balls used by sailors to calibrate their chronometers. An electrician named Jacob Starr built a 700-pound ball made of wood and iron, covered in 125-watt light bulbs. As the clock struck midnight, the ball was lowered down a flagpole, a visual representation of the passing of time. It was a stroke of genius, a mechanical ritual for the machine age. The ball drop became a secular liturgy, a moment where millions of eyes focused on a single point, counting down the death of the old and the birth of the new. With the advent of radio and then television, this local event became a global phenomenon. The countdown was no longer a solitary experience, it was a synchronized pulse shared by billions. We began to see images of fireworks cascading over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the London Eye, and the Kremlin. The New Year became the one holiday that transcended religion, nationality, and politics, a moment of shared humanity. In the modern era, the celebration has become a relay race of light. We watch as the timeline sweeps across the globe, starting in the Pacific islands of Kiribati and moving westward. It is a testament to how far we have come from the nervous priests of Babylon. We no longer fear that the sun will fail to rise, instead, we revel in the mastery of our own chronology. We have tamed the calendar, turning the terrifying unknown of the future into a precise, manageable countdown. Yet, beneath the neon lights and the champagne toasts, the ancient impulse remains. We still make resolutions, a modern echo of the Babylonian promise to return farm equipment. We still gather with loved ones, reflecting the Egyptian desire to commune with ancestors. We still sing Auld Lang Syne, a song about preserving the memory of old friends and old times, acknowledging the bittersweet passage of life. The journey from the mud-brick ziggurats to the lead screens of Times Square is a story of humanity's refusal to be passive victims of time. We have measured it, named it, fought over it, and finally, shared it. The calendar on your phone is not just a utility, it is a monument to thousands of years of struggle, a treaty signed between the human mind and the indifferent stars. Closing summary. As we stand at the threshold of each new year, looking into the foggy potential of the future, we carry the weight of this immense history with us. We are the heirs of the Babylonian priests who first dared to map the heavens, and the Roman emperors who tried to command them. We are the children of the farmers who watched the Nile with hope, and the rioters who fought for their 11 days. Every time we glance at a date, we are using a tool forged in the fires of ancient ambition and refined by the cool logic of science. The history of the new year is, ultimately, the history of hope. It is the stubborn human belief that we can begin again. No matter how dark the winter, no matter how chaotic the year that has passed, we insist on drawing a line in the sands of time and saying, here, we start anew. It is a collective act of faith, not in a God, but in ourselves and in the possibility of a better tomorrow. In a world that often feels fractured, the new year is a rare moment of global synchronization. For a few fleeting hours, the entire human species looks in the same direction, forward. We lay down our burdens, if only for a moment, and raise a glass to the endurance of the human spirit. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you made it this far, you're the reason we keep going. Please subscribe and help us continue sharing these stories with the world.